are Chris Lee, Blayne Gilmer, and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, presented by Stakes. We are here to preview Week 8. Holy cow, where's the time gone? Week 8 of college football action. This one involves Mississippi State and Alabama in a series that has been fairly lopsided of late. Neither team exactly happy about the way their weekends went. Last weekend, both teams lose. Mississippi State's offense never really showed up in a loss at Kentucky, and Alabama's defense never really showed up in a loss at Tennessee, although that had a lot to do with Tennessee. And frankly, State's performance had a lot to do with Kentucky's defense too, I know, to give full credit. But we were talking about this before the preview. Blayne, I watch Alabama, and Alabama's got a lot of talent. Jahmyr Gibbs, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, but it doesn't quite seem like we were watching Alabama football, particularly after the Tide gave up 52 points in regulation to Tennessee.
No, I agree. And I feel like there's been a change and I know Nick Saban is still the greatest. He's done so much, but I feel like with so much changing in college football, I feel like Alabama almost felt like with Tua and Jalen Hurts and Lane Kiffin coming aboard and changing offenses and those wide receivers that they had, I felt like they were on the forefront of that. So maybe they tried to get out on the forefront on some of these issues like NIL, transfer portal, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if the Alabama culture is necessarily the same. In the teams that you would see in the past, for Alabama being so great, they look much more like the Georgias now, where there's a, maybe not a superstar, but there's a almost all conference caliber player at each position. And now, it seems like there's places in that Alabama defense and on the Alabama offensive line that people think that they can attack, and that just used to not be the case, Chris.
Yeah, agreed. Blake, your thoughts on this?
No, I mean, it is interesting to think about, like you said, because I think even like going into this past week, right? Like one of the things we all talked about was, they just felt like there's just something different with this Alabama team, even though they've got the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, right? Like they've got Bryce Young, they've got Will Anderson, who we can talk about that in a minute in terms of the Tennessee game. But, it just felt like something has been missing with this team. And is that kind of the case with, again, just sort of the changing nature of what Blayne's talking about? How does that kind of play into that whole equation? Yeah, it is. And again, before Blayne brought it up, like it's one of those things you don't really dive into much. Like you're like, okay, something maybe feels a little bit different about this team. But when you really think about it, maybe how the roster's built and kind of it also what's happening around them as well, right? Like with Georgia becoming what Georgia's become. And we talked about Tennessee, other teams like that. It's kind of interesting to think about kind of where Alabama is now and maybe what Alabama looks like moving forward versus what we've seen throughout the entire Nick Saban era in that regard.
Two things, Blake. I'm disappointed that when you said reigning, you didn't go Paul Heyman and say reigning.
Reigning, defending.
Undisputed.
Chris doesn't get that reference, of course, Blayne.
A little disappointed in not bringing the wrestling to the forefront there. But the second thing is that to kind of piggyback off of that is Alabama's recruiting has not suffered any. They're still number one, number two every year in high school recruiting. They've been over the last 3 or 4 cycles, but it used to be that they would recruit an elite level, and those guys had to just know they were coming in to wait their time and stuff like that. But now with the transfer portal, it's almost like, okay, we've got these high profile guys we brought in, so we got to play them. We've got these guys that are on NIL that we got to pay them and probably find a way to play them, or they'll be in the portal. And I think it may be a learning curve even for the great Nick Saban to adjust to, Chris.
Well, yeah, and I think, and we'll get into this later, this is not going to be the all Alabama preview here. Some interesting stuff with State, but my goodness, this is not a great matchup for the Bulldogs for reasons that I'll get into. I think State is a really good team. I've said that all year. I've planted my flag on that team, but the offensive inconsistency at times has just been befuddling. State barely had 200 yards of total offense at Kentucky, and Alabama's defense, as bad as it looked, statistically has still been really good, guys. Alabama's giving up 18.1 points a game, is giving up 3.5 yards per run play. That's taking out sacks, even with being absolutely torched by Tennessee. Alabama's giving up 5.3 yards per pass play. Part of that thanks to 19 sacks. Will Rogers, we all know that kid completes a ton of passes. The issue that I see is State is only averaging as good as that passing attack has been at 6.7 yards per pass play. It's been the longer throws downfield, a lot of times beating safeties that have given Alabama fits. I want to ask you this, Blayne, because State has not scored a lot of points against Alabama. I know Alabama's had trouble with the pass, but is this the kind of passing attack that can give Alabama trouble?
They're not, I mean, they'll take their shots, but they're not as just vertical and as breakneck pace, frenetic of a pace as Tennessee is. It's different. It is air raid, but it is a different type of offensive attack. There's nobody, I don't think, that does as good of a job as formationing receivers for the mismatches as Tennessee does and Josh Heupel does. However, Mike Leach is very, very skilled at being able to do that himself. I'm sure that they're capable of adjusting to attempt to attack some of the same weaknesses, but attempting to do it and being able to execute it is two different things.
It's like if you think about on your schedule, teams you don't necessarily want to play back to back in terms of if you're Alabama, right, and you're the secondary, just going through what you had to go through at Tennessee. Now you play a Mississippi State team, like Blayne said, that is not at the exact same pace, but priority is throwing the ball down the field and trying to kind of test you with that. Although, Chris, you brought up kind of the trying to get the running game going and those kind of things, but I think that's going to be challenging against Alabama. So it does come down to that, and I think it's what adjustments does Alabama make in that regard, and what can they adjust to based off of what happened last week. But I mean, you got to think like you got to be exhausted after in that game last week, and you kind of having to match up with Tennessee the way they did, and just you said it. I mean, pretty much just torching them and doing a lot of things they wanted to do offensively. Did the Vols. Now you come back and play a team that's going to throw the ball a ton. It's a challenge, but I think it's one that I don't know, like this Mississippi State team, I think, as I've said before, like on the road thus far in SEC play, they played two teams, right? Played LSU, they played Kentucky, and they've just not really been able to get any sort of consistency on offense going in either one of those games. Yeah, you go back to the Arizona game, but Arizona's not, I think, those two teams. So I think that's another part of the challenge for Mississippi State here is if you look at it from that standpoint, I think there is a challenge from Alabama's side defending the pass, given what you just had to do last week. But at the same time, I don't know that Mississippi State has shown us enough to this point, especially on the road, that they may be able to put up the numbers anywhere close to what Tennessee did.
Okay, before we get to the other side of the ball, college football season is underway. The best place to make your sports predictions without risking your bankroll is Stakes. That is Stakes. Predict anything in the game. Take the game time excitement to the next level when you compete with your friends and other fans on the Stakes app. During their weekly competitions, you can build your predictions track record by winning competitions and earning NFT trophies for making the perfect calls. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Sign up, use the invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. Stakes is always free to play, free to join, have fun, beat us in our predictions, brag about it, and you can thank us later. But anyway, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Stakes. Okay. I mentioned this is not a great matchup for Mississippi State, and it doesn't get a whole lot better on the other side of the ball in some ways. Alabama is scoring 45 points a game. State's giving up 21.9. And again, I think this is a very respectable defense. But here is a problem. Jahmyr Gibbs has been awfully, awfully good for Alabama, especially lately. Alabama is averaging 7.2 yards per run play after you take sacks out. After you take sacks out, State is giving up 5.4 yards per rush. It almost gave up 2 Bills to Chris Rodriguez Jr. Kentucky had not been running the ball well at all. State provided a get-right scenario for Kentucky and that one. And look, I don't want to go off one game too much, but there's going to be some other things that bother me. When Alabama throws the ball, it's averaging 7.5 yards a throw. State giving up 5.8, which is really good. That, again, just for sacks. And, of course, it's not just that. Emmanuel Forbes is a nightmare because he can not only pick you, he can run it back the other way. Now, Alabama's only thrown 5 picks, and Bryce Young was really good with the ball last week. So I don't know how much State can do. This, to me, does not play. The matchup does not play to State's strengths defensively in my mind, Blayne.
No, but I will say this. I think Mississippi State has a better defense than Tennessee does.
I do too.
Yeah, like that's not even a doubt in my mind. If you'd have told me going into the Alabama-Tennessee game that Tennessee was going to have 1 sack, I tell you Alabama wins that game. And here's the thing. If Mississippi State wants a chance to win this game, Zach Arnett is going to have to find a way not only to dial up pressures, but for Nathaniel Watson, Tyrus Wheat, Colin Duncan, all these guys that are leading them in sacks, Randy Charlton, all these guys, get them and they have to get home. You know what I'm saying? Because it's almost like you have to pick your poison. If you just pressure Bryce Young, well, you're really putting yourself in danger, Will Robinson, because, that's where he seems to thrive half the time. But to your point, their secondary is opportunistic. They've got to actually sack Bryce Young multiple times, affect him with that, that shoulder can't be feeling great after throwing it 7 billion times against Tennessee. So I think I have a little bit more confidence in their defense than I do than maybe I even should in this Alabama matchup, especially with it being at Alabama. But I think they can pose some problems for them. I just don't know if they're going to play complementary enough on the offensive side to help out that defense for the entirety of the game, Blake.
Yeah, and I mean, look, Chris, we kind of joked about it in the, I guess one of the live streams we did, but like Emmanuel Forbes is probably going to have a chance to return an interception for a touchdown. I mean, it's just what the guy does at this point, right? Like he did that against Kentucky. But Blayne brought up the best point, and it's something that was talked about a lot during that Tennessee game, was when Tennessee got pressure, it became, unless you can just get a hand on the guy and get him down, Bryce Young is going to run around and do the Houdini act that we saw so many times and we've seen so many times before. And I think that's the biggest part of this game is you have to find a way. If you're, like Blayne said, it's pick your poison. Decide how you're going to defend what they can do. And I think the extra layer of that is what you said, Chris, about Jahmyr Gibbs. And to me, this feels like a Jahmyr Gibbs type game where he could just explode for a huge traditional Alabama running back type stat line, right? Where he could just put up a ton of yards here. I think that's certainly a possibility in this game. But I think there's something as well to the thought of kind of what Blayne mentioned about Bryce Young. And, we're not going to play doctor here, but like those are the kind of things that you do have to think about based on last week. He certainly looked like he was Bryce Young. But, what percentage is he playing at? Those kind of things. Does that have any impact on this game? I don't want to go too far in that direction because, like I said, that guy at 75% is as good as anybody probably out there. So he was terrific last week, and I think that's your expectation. He's going to be terrific again. If he's as good as he was last week, this could be a long game for Mississippi State. So
Toradol is a great thing.
Okay, I'll be honest, guys. When this came out, we're doing this Sunday night. The line that I'm seeing is 22.5. Over under 60.5. We're not professional bettors. Don't want to be, but we watch a lot of SEC football. And my immediate thought was, man, that is going to be my pick of the week. State to cover that number.
Yeah.
But Blayne, My goodness, it's not just the individual matchups that we looked at and State's trouble stopping the run and all those things. It's, my goodness, the history and things on this just screams Alabama.
Yeah. I mean, it's been lopsided, and it is in Tuscaloosa, and it is after an Alabama loss, and it is going to be just week of, I can imagine, just unbelievable practice for Alabama. So probably a tough spot, especially given the history of just this year of how Mississippi State is played on the road. But you got to think that if, with being third year in the system with Zach Arnett and the pride that team has, that they keep it within 22. I mean, I don't know. I agree with you. I feel like they can.
Blake, read the numbers.
All right, so here's some of the numbers via covers, which you guys know at this point. I love looking at some of these trends from covers. To me, it looks like the under is the best play here, which if you take the under, I think you assume that they are able to keep that within that number. The under 4-0 in the last 4 games Mississippi State has played on the road. The under is 6-0 for Alabama, their last 6 games following a straight-up loss. So a lot of unders in play there. But here's where things start to kind of go in the opposite direction, Chris. Alabama's 4-0 against the spread in their last 4 games following a straight-up loss. So, meaning they bounce back pretty well, which, again, we would expect, right? The under is also 7-1 in Alabama's last 8 games when allowing more than 40 points in their previous game, which I don't know. That may date back to 1950 because I don't know how many times they've allowed 40-something points. But here's the biggest one. Mississippi State 1-6 against the spread. Their last 7 games in Tuscaloosa, 0-4 in the last 4, meaning that the favorite is 4-0 against the spread in the last 4 meetings between these two teams, and the under 17-4-1 in the last 22. So everything kind of leaning in Alabama's favor here in terms of the under 2, but that's a lot of points, guys. A lot of points. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you one more set of things here before we make our picks. Okay, last year in Starkville, your final score, Alabama 49, State 9. Year before in Tuscaloosa, 41-0. That's Mike Leach's debut year. Year before that, Alabama wins that one 38-7. Year before that, Alabama wins 24-0. State just has not been scoring points against Alabama.
Yeah.
It is a different Alabama defense, or at least it was last week. But I just don't like anything in the way this lines up. Okay, if your over-under is 60.5, and your line is 22.5, that means your predicted final is 42-19 in Alabama's favor. Man, as much as I wanted to pick Mississippi State to cover the number, I can't. I don't have a great feel on the over-under. I'll probably take the under after all the stuff you threw out. Just the memory of Alabama's defense chasing down receivers has got me a little nervous about that. But the history is pretty loud there. So let's have y'all's picks.
I think the under probably hits as well, just because I do have a little bit of faith in Zach Arnett's defense, and it was a tough game for Alabama last week physically. So I'm going to take Alabama to win, Mississippi State to cover, and the under.
I think I'm going to go with all that Blayne said, because the thing I can't shake about Alabama winning this in just, 5-touchdown fashion is just the sloppiness and the penalties. Like, we've talked about that all year long at times with this team. I'm not just going back to it last week, but, are they going to have 17 penalties again this week? I don't think so, but I just think that's something that can be that can be a touchdown one way or the other. Like, you can make those kind of penalties, a pass interference, or those kind of things, and I think those are kind of things that have stuck out with this team going back to our discussion we had at the start. Yeah, I'm picking Alabama to win this game. I wouldn't be surprised if they win by 3 touchdowns, but 21 is not 22 or 22.5, right? So I may pick Mississippi State to keep it within that 3 touchdown number, but I think this is a bounce back spot clearly for Alabama.
Okay, we'll have updates on our Wednesday Night Live show. Thank you for watching. We are previewing every single SEC game, not just this week, but for the season. Best way to catch those, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 14.